Welcome back. Good to have you back. My name is Don, taking you to the places we drive by every day in the St. Louis area without even realizing that history happened here. And as we speak, history is happening here on a daily basis. This place is ground zero for this latest schism that is threatening the solidarity of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, I am no longer a Catholic, but I still speak the language, as they say. And so I want to try to explain a little bit, without going too deep into Catholic theology, what's happening at churches like this one. St. Mary's Assumption is where I am located. I'm in South St. Louis, in the Lafayette Square neighborhood, just south of downtown. And this historic church is one of only about 100 like it in the United States. Now, there are about 17,000 Catholic churches in the United States. They are shrinking. Parishes are shrinking and closing. Parishes are being combined. But there's still about 17,000 Catholic churches in the U.S. And there are only 100 of them, roughly, that are affiliated with the organization that runs this church. Because even though it is a Catholic church, it is Catholic with an asterisk. Because it is not part of the St. Louis Archdiocese. In most places, the churches are all part of a diocese or archdiocese that governs the church. This one is not. This one is kind of a free agent. St. Mary's Assumption is. It's part of a group called the Society of St. Pius X, SSPX for short. And you may have seen SSPX in the news a lot lately, because SSPX is the reason for the latest schism that has been declared by the Pope. Because it is very rare for the Pope to declare the church in a state of schism. Just him using that word is loaded. The last time the church was declared in a state of schism was in 1988, and back then we had Pope John Paul II. Now, John Paul II, in terms of popes, is his own ecosystem, his own stratosphere. He was universally loved, for the most part, in the Catholic Church. He was his own force of nature. This new pope, this new American pope that was recently elected, Pope Leo from Chicago, the Pope, they call him, the Pope, the Bears. Well, the Pope is not nearly as popular right now as John Paul II was. So the schism that John Paul II declared, he deftly handled it. And the reason for that schism is the same reason for this schism. And it all has to do with the Society of St. Pius X. That's the reason why this whole thing is blowing up. This is one of only 100 Society of St. Pius X churches in the United States. It is an offshoot, extremely conservative, traditionalist branch of the Catholic Church. Now, as you see here, Society of St. Pius X. They have their Latin Mass. It's a traditional Latin Mass. You come to Mass here, you will hear Latin. Now, to say that this all has to do with the Latin Mass, I think is to oversimplify it. I mean, that's the triggering point, this insistence on the Latin Mass. But the larger issue here deals with a conservative liberal rift that is currently plaguing the Catholic Church. They're trying to bring two sides together, just like in this country, really. You know, we have liberals and conservatives, and they're not playing ball with each other like they used to, for the good of the United States, or in this case, for the good of the church in general. Each side is kind of dug their feet in. And a part of that is the Latin Mass. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, this liberal conservative thing. The Latin Mass is just the tip of the iceberg. There are other things that are involved here. For one thing, the LGBTQ thing. How is the church going to handle LGBTQ members? And Pope Leo is trying to further modernize the Catholic Church. as it relates to LGBTQ. Now, he's not, at this point, he's not treading on doctrine in recognizing LGBTQ marriages. But what he is doing, he's opening the door with something that's called a synodality. It's hard to say, synodality, synodality, which is a listening tour all around the world, listening to the concerns of LGBTQ plus members, with the idea that the church would learn from these listening tours and somehow hammer out a compromise of sorts, or an extension of an olive branch to LGBTQ members, to try to get them back in the fold, because the Catholic Church has a membership problem. Now, I know I'm going to cause a lot of people to get angry when I said that. The Catholic Church says there's 1.4 billion Catholics in the world. I can tell you right now that number is complete nonsense. Nonsense. That is an inflated number from the get-go, because Catholics count baptisms. They don't count members, they count baptisms. Well, if you're baptized at 3 weeks of age into the Catholic Church and you never go to church, or as you become an adult you leave the church, Catholics will still count you, and that's how they come up with that number. So the Catholic Church does have a membership problem. Now, the last Easter season, they did experience a record number of converts, adult converts to the Catholic Church. And I applaud that. Anytime someone wants to get baptized into a new church and embrace that church, I applaud that. The problem is, most of those converts came to the Catholic Church with the idea of becoming more and more conservative. They were drawn to perhaps not the hardcore conservatism that we see here, but they were drawn to a more conservative mass, a more formal mass. Now, the reason why the Society of St. Pius X has triggered this schism, I mean, it's always been at odds with the Vatican because it's so conservative. And the Vatican is moving to become more and more liberal, especially with this new American Pope. But Pius X was a pope in the early 20th century, and he is generally thought to be the most conservative pope in modern times. He was a traditionalist, and he wanted to go back to the traditional way that the church celebrated Mass centuries ago. So in 1965, the Second Vatican Council, known as Vatican II by most people, wrapped up in Rome. And what Vatican II did in the middle part of the 20th century was tried to modernize, and it indeed did modernize, the Catholic Mass. It was trying to bring the Catholic Mass out of its old historic origins and put a new modern spin on it. And involved things like no longer saying the Mass in the Latin. Some liked it, some did not. Society of Pius X did not like it. Hello. How are you? Good. Moving into the school now, huh?
Yes.
How long is that going to be?
We don't know.
Oh, I was hoping to be able to see inside. Well, anyway. Well, good seeing you guys.
You too.
Bye-bye. God bless you. Bye-bye. You realize those priests that we just met are all excommunicated. Every one of them was excommunicated because they're affiliated with this church, and because they're affiliated with this church, the Vatican has excommunicated all priests that are affiliated with the Society of St. Pius X. Because they are not adhering to the authority of the Pope. Respect my authority. They're not. They're not respecting the Pope's authority. And it has to do with the ordination of 4 very conservative bishops. Very conservative Society of St. Pius X bishops in Switzerland. What they're doing is they are packing their bishopric, for lack of a better term, with conservative bishops. They're packing it. And they decided that they were going to ordain 4 extremely conservative bishops in Switzerland in defiance of the Pope. The Pope needs to sign off and approve all nominations or all ordinations for bishops. And when the Society of St. Pius X nominated these 4 extremely conservative bishops, they knew that the Pope, who was skewing more and more liberal, was not going to approve that because these bishops were too conservative. And he told them, he said, do not ordain these, don't do it, because if you do it, you're going to be excommunicated. Just a fair warning. They did it. And not only were the bishops excommunicated, but every priest that is affiliated with this church is also excommunicated, which means for 500,000 Catholics around the world, and about 750 of them here in St. Louis, they are potentially excommunicated if they come to Mass here knowing that they are taking the sacrament from an excommunicated priest in defiance of the Pope. They themselves are excommunicated. Now, if you just stumble off the street and you don't really know what's going on here, and you don't have a problem with the Pope, you still respect the Pope's authority, and you take the sacrament, or you take the Eucharist from a Catholic priest here, and you don't know any better, no, you're not excommunicated. But if you do come down here to attend Mass, as you see, they get the Mass on 7:30 and 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings. If you do come down here for the purposes of attending this traditional Latin Mass, knowing that it's in defiance of the Papal Authority, you yourself are excommunicated. Now, excommunications in the Catholic Church are not the big deal. I'm excommunicated. I excommunicated myself from the Catholic Church because I rejected the authority of the Pope. That's a big one, by the way. Rejecting the authority of the Pope is an automatic excommunication. The moment you do it, you have excommunicated yourself. You do not need anybody to proclaim that. But for me to come back to the Catholic Church, or any of these people who are excommunicated, to come back to the Catholic Church, it's really pretty easy. You just go to confession. At an approved Catholic Church, one that the Vatican has declared not to be in a state of schism, and the priest hears you out, you genuinely apologize for your apostasy, and you're back in. Yeah, you may say a couple of Our Fathers and a Hail Mary or something like that, but you're back. So getting excommunicated if you're a Catholic is not a big deal, because they believe that once a Catholic, always a Catholic. That's how they think with me, even though I am excommunicated. So does this mean the Catholic Church is going to break apart? And the answer is probably no. Probably not. The Church has weathered these kinds of storms in the past. They've always found some way to heal the rift. In fact, the excommunicated bishops and the excommunicated priests have all said, don't worry, we'll be back. We'll be back. Excommunication in Catholicism is not as serious as it is in other religions, like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where if you are excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you're basically deleted. In a Catholic excommunication, you're just kind of put on timeout till you come around and see the error of your ways and repent. Now, Catholics, if you ask them about this, will tell you that the Church has gone through so many of these types of things in the past that there's no way that the Church is going to lose its cohesiveness, that somehow this rift will be healed. And that's probably true. But things are different this time around. Well, for one thing, social media has changed it. In 1988, the last time the Church was in schism, there was no social media. Now, my social media, even though I'm no longer a Catholic, my social media feed explodes with stories about SSPX on a daily basis. So because social media is out there, this controversy is front and center. Every time the slightest little thing develops, it's front and center. I don't know what that was. I think it's time to go now.
Well, I'm not going to move from this spot to... What's the matter? Hello, listen. What is it? Trying to look at gas ray. George, get off! It's going to blow up! Get off! You hear me? Just get off it! George! Georgia, you all right? Georgia, you all right?
You know, the whole time I was walking around this church building, before I was so rudely interrupted by that buzzing sidewalk, the whole time I was walking around down there, I kept looking at the building thinking, you know, this place just does not look Catholic to me. I mean, I know a Catholic when I see a Catholic, and this place just didn't cut it. And so I decided to go back down to the neighborhood. Beautiful area of Victorian homes. In fact, one of the largest remaining neighborhoods of original Victorian homes in the whole country, Lafayette Square in St. Louis. I decided to go back down and do a little bit more research on the architecture. We talked a lot about the theology of the building. Let's talk about the architecture of it. Okay, again, from this angle, maybe not so bad. But there are some clues that this thing was not originally Catholic. Look at that window up there. Those are not Catholic windows. They're beautiful windows, but they're not beautiful. My voice is changing. They're beautiful windows, but those are not classically Catholic windows. And so I want to go back to this cornerstone here. This was not the original cornerstone of the building. This says 1902, 1917. This building is a lot older than that. There, we can get it in English here. The other side was in Greek. St. Mary's Assumption, Ruthenian Greek Catholic Church. Ruthenian goes back to the ancient land of Rus. I'm not going to get hog wild and explain all that, other than to say that think Ukrainian. This is an Eastern Rite church. A Ruthenian Greek Catholic Church is Ukrainian, which explains why it has that Eastern iconography. Oh, golly. Iconography up there. That is extremely Eastern in the way that it looks. I really want to get in this place. Really want to get in this. But I did some research on this building. And the reason why it does not look Catholic is that it wasn't Catholic. This thing was built to be an Episcopalian church in 1878. And that's more in keeping with the style of architecture, this Gothic revival style of architecture. Not classically Catholic, because it wasn't Catholic when it was built. So to wrap up, want to know something really freaky about this building? I mean, now the building is more interesting to me than the order of Catholicism that meets in it. Although SSPX is very interesting and very newsworthy right now. But the building itself is just fascinating to me because for its first 30 years it was Episcopalian. And then from about 1912 on in through the 1960s into the 1970s, it was, we'll call it Ukrainian Eastern Catholic. Ruthenian is the official term, but it was Eastern Catholic. They still had communion with the Holy See. So that was not an offshoot. They were in full communion with the Vatican. And then when they left this building, they sold it. They sold it to the Metropolitan Community Church. The gay lesbian church in St. Louis met in this building from roughly 1984 until 1997. And then in 1997, SSPX, who was looking for a place to have its services. You see, because they were not in communion with the Vatican, the Archdiocese of St. Louis would not sell them any property. So any decommissioned Catholic churches that looked Catholic, that they would have possibly wanted to purchase to have their congregation, the Archdiocese would not sell them any of those buildings because they were effectively excommunicated or not in communion with the Vatican. So because they couldn't find a building, for the longest time they met privately in rented spaces and rooms and things like that, off-site. And then finally in the 1990s, they learned that this building became available. The most conservative wing of Catholicism purchased its building from the gay church And SSPX has a lot of problems with accommodating LGBTQ members. It's one of their big things. They do not want any sort of overtures made to LGBTQ members because they perceive that as violating pre-Vatican II standards. That is just wild that that's how this building came to be. So it turns out my Catholic instincts have not left me after all. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic, they say. And I knew just by looking at this place was not Catholic. At least it didn't start out that way. Turns out I was right. What a fascinating place this is, though. This building is a mutt, a theological mutt, but it is a wonderful mutt. Episcopalian, Eastern, gay lesbian, now the most conservative wing of Roman Catholicism meeting in this building. Wow, you talk about a mutt. That is the definition of a mutt. Thank you for joining me. I will see you soon on another episode. Bye-bye.